The message lit up my phone just as the kettle began to whistle. 6 words. Cold, sharp, final. You're not invited to the party. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. After all, I'd spent months planning it, paying for every flower, every slice of cake, every glittering detail meant to make my granddaughter smile. If you've ever trusted the wrong people, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from, because sometimes betrayal comes from the faces you love most. My hands trembled, the steam from the kettle fogging my glasses as I read the message again and again. The house felt so quiet, it almost hurt. That was the moment everything inside me began to change. It happened on a quiet Saturday morning, just as the sun was spilling through my kitchen curtains. My phone buzzed against the counter. That small, harmless sound that usually meant a message from family. But this one stopped me cold. I stared at the screen, rereading the words over and over, waiting for them to change. My daughter-in-law, Caroline, had sent a short, clipped message, telling me that my presence at my granddaughter's Sweet 16 party wasn't necessary anymore. Just like that. After months of planning, booking the venue, paying deposits, and watching Emma's excitement grow, I was suddenly not welcome. At first, I thought I was misunderstanding it. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she meant something else. But the longer I looked at that message, the heavier it became. The warmth in my kitchen seemed to fade, replaced by something hollow and cold. It wasn't just about the money. I could have given that freely 100 times over. It was about the meaning behind it, the countless nights I'd stayed up planning, the little details I'd chosen with love, the joy I thought I was creating for my family. And now, in one short message, all of that was taken away from me. Not because of what I'd done, but because of what I no longer meant to them. There's a kind of silence that follows heartbreak. It's not loud or dramatic. It's still. It's the kind that forces you to see the truth you've been avoiding. Sitting there, phone in hand, I realized this wasn't about a party. It was about respect, or the lack of it. And in that silence, something inside me shifted. The pain didn't fade, but it hardened into something sharper. Clarity. Maybe. The night before the party, I made a decision that changed everything. After my husband passed away, the house grew too quiet. The mornings were the hardest. No sound of the coffee maker running, no soft humming from the hallway, just the tick of the kitchen clock echoing through rooms that used to hold laughter. I learned to fill the silence with small things, baking bread on Sundays, tending to my rose bushes, and waiting for my son Michael's calls. Michael tried his best. He was always a good man, steady, kind, though lately buried in work and responsibilities. He'd call me on his drives home sometimes, his voice tired but warm. I could tell he loved me, but love has a way of getting lost in the noise of a busy life. Then there was Caroline, his wife, polished, put together, the kind of woman who looked perfect even on grocery runs. She came from a family that had more, I suppose, more money, more status, more of everything I never really cared about. Caroline was polite, never cruel, but distant. She'd smile through tight lips and make small talk that left me feeling smaller somehow, like I was a guest in a home that should have felt like family. The bright spot in all of it was Emma, my granddaughter. 16 years old, curious and full of laughter that reminded me of her father when he was young. When she visited, the house came alive again. We'd bake cookies and sing along to old songs I thought everyone had forgotten. She'd tell me about her dreams, her favorite teachers, the friends she trusted, and the ones she didn't. Those moments gave me something to wake up for, someone to pour my love into again. Still, I could feel the distance growing. Caroline didn't like when Emma spent too much time at my house. There were comments about boundaries and letting them handle things their way. I tried not to take it personally, but deep down, I knew I was being pushed to the edges of my own family. So I smiled, kept quiet, and did what I always did. Showed love the best way I knew how. I remember one evening, Emma sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes shining as she told me about her dream, Sweet 16. She described the dress, the music, the decorations, every detail painted with excitement. I laughed and told her she deserved the world, but inside, I felt a small ache. I wanted to give her that joy, to make her dreams come true. At the same time, something tugged at me, a quiet hesitation. I'd been here before, the one who gives and gives, hoping to earn a place that should already be mine. Still, when Emma looked at me with that hopeful smile, I knew I'd find a way. Because love, for me, has always meant doing whatever it takes, even when it costs more than it should. And that moment, the sparkle in her eyes when she said, "I just want it to be special," was the spark that lit everything that came after. At first, it all felt innocent, sweet. Even Emma would sit beside me at the kitchen table, her eyes shining as she described her dream party. A shimmering pink gown, fairy lights hanging from the ceiling, a chocolate fountain tall enough to feel like magic. Her excitement was contagious, and I found myself swept along in her world of glitter and music and laughter. It started small, a deposit for the venue she loved. I wrote the check without hesitation, my heart full. I told myself it was what grandmothers did, helped make memories. Then came the catering. Caroline mentioned how much Emma adored this one restaurant that just happened to offer event packages. I remember hesitating for only a moment before pulling out my checkbook again. After all, what's money compared to joy? Each week, there was something new. The photographer who captured the moment beautifully. The designer dress Emma couldn't live without. The little details that somehow became necessities. Caroline was always so gracious, always telling me how generous I was, how lucky Emma was to have a grandmother like me. Her voice was smooth, kind, and practiced. She never asked directly, but somehow, I always ended up offering. It was strange how easy it became. Each check felt like a promise that maybe this time I'd be part of something bigger than just the bill payer. I wanted to believe it was love, not obligation, that kept me reaching for my pen. When I saw Emma's face light up as we talked about the decorations, I convinced myself it was worth it, that this was how family showed love, through giving, through doing, through being needed. But there were moments that didn't sit right. I'd catch a look between Caroline and Michael, a quiet exchange that felt calculated. Or I'd hear Caroline talking about the guest list, her tone making me feel like a vendor rather than a grandmother. Once, when I mentioned the budget getting tight, she brushed it off with a soft laugh and said I shouldn't worry, that everything would work out. One evening, I sat at my dining table, receipts scattered around like fallen leaves, the numbers blurred together. But when I finally added them, the total hit me like a cold wind. $19,500. I stared at it for a long time, feeling both foolish and afraid. How had I gotten here? Still, I tried to quiet the unease. I told myself it was love, that you can't put a price on seeing your granddaughter happy. I even smiled, convincing myself I'd done the right thing. But deep down, there was a tremor, a whisper that maybe love shouldn't cost this much, and maybe generosity shouldn't hurt. Something inside me knew the balance had shifted. I just didn't realize yet how far it would go, or how cruelly that realization would come. It was the evening before the party. I remember because I had just finished wrapping Emma's gift, a delicate gold bracelet with a tiny heart charm. I'd sat there in the soft light of my living room, feeling proud, maybe even content. Everything was ready. Everything I'd done had been for her. Then my phone buzzed. Just one small vibration against the table. I reached for it without thinking, expecting maybe a photo from Emma or a message about the final details. But the words on the screen stopped me. They were short, polite, cold. Caroline was letting me know that there had been a change in plans and that my attendance was no longer necessary. For a moment, I didn't understand. I read the message again and again. My mind searched for any possible misunderstanding. Maybe it was a scheduling issue. Maybe it wasn't meant for me. But each time I read it, the truth pressed harder against my chest. I was uninvited. The room suddenly felt smaller. The clock ticked louder. Even the air seemed heavier. My hands trembled as I set the phone down, the faint glow of the screen still burning in my vision. I sat there for a long time, completely still. I thought about the dress, the music, the cake, all the details I'd helped plan. I thought about the checks I'd written, the late nights I'd spent making sure everything would be perfect. And now, I wasn't even allowed to be there. What hurt most wasn't the message itself. It was the silence that followed. My son, Michael, didn't call, didn't text, didn't stand up for me. I kept waiting for him to reach out, to say something, anything that would make it better. But nothing came. That silence was louder than any argument could have been. It told me everything I needed to know. That my love had become a transaction. And once the money was spent, I no longer had a place at the table. I felt foolish, small, like I'd been erased from my own family's story. I'd wanted so badly to belong that I'd ignored every warning sign. But as the hours passed, something inside me began to shift. Beneath the heartbreak, beneath the humiliation, a different feeling started to form. A quiet, steady anger. Not the kind that destroys, but the kind that clears the fog. By midnight, I wasn't crying anymore. I just sat there, calm, looking at the gift I'd wrapped. For the first time, I saw things clearly. This wasn't just about a party. It was about respect, about dignity, about finally choosing myself. And I knew then, tomorrow, things would not go the way they expected. The next morning, the world felt strangely still. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, surrounded by receipts, check stubs, and invoices. Every piece of paper was a fragment of what I'd given, each dollar tied to a moment of trust, each signature a little surrender of myself. The sunlight crept slowly across the table, catching the edges of those papers like quiet witnesses to what I'd allowed. For a long while, I just stared at them. I could feel the echo of last night's pain still lingering, but it had dulled, like a bruise no longer sharp, only tender. Somewhere in the stillness, I heard my husband's voice, not in words, but in the kind of memory that feels like a presence. He'd always told me that kindness should never come at the cost of dignity. I realized, sitting there, how far I'd strayed from that. I'd spent a lifetime giving to my son, to my family, to people who took and smiled but never truly saw me. Love, I thought, was supposed to be unconditional, but it wasn't supposed to erase you. That realization hit me like cool air after a storm. I gathered every receipt into a neat stack, smoothing the edges with my hand. Then I reached for my phone. The first call was to the venue. My voice was calm, steady. I told them the event was canceled and to refund what remained of my deposit. Then the caterer, the florist, the DJ. One by one, I unwound every thread I had woven into that party. Each call felt like reclaiming a small piece of myself. No anger, no tears, just quiet certainty. By the time I hung up the last call, the kitchen was filled with a new kind of silence. Not the heavy kind that follows heartbreak, but the peaceful kind that comes after truth. I looked down at the bracelet I'd meant to give Emma, the one with the tiny gold heart, and closed the box. Maybe one day she'd understand what love really meant. I thought about Caroline, about Michael, about the party that would never happen. I imagined the shock, the confusion, maybe even the anger. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel afraid of any of it, because as I sat there, surrounded by the remnants of my own generosity, one simple truth settled deep inside me. If I wasn't good enough to be invited, I wasn't good enough to pay. And with that, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The next morning, the world outside my window was still gray and quiet. A thin line of rain traced the glass, and for a brief moment, everything felt untouched, peaceful, as if the storm of the night before had never happened. I sat at the same kitchen table, the one that had held my receipts and my heartbreak, now cleared except for a single cup of coffee. The house was silent, but I could almost sense the hum of something approaching. It began slowly, the faint buzz of my phone on the counter. Once, then again, then over and over, until it was nearly constant. The names flashing on the screen didn't surprise me. Michael, Caroline, even Emma. I didn't answer. I just watched the phone light up and fade again, each vibration like a ripple breaking the morning calm. For years, I'd been the one who rushed to pick up, who softened my tone, who tried to make everything right. But not that morning. That morning, I let the calls come and go. I had nothing left to explain. Eventually, the messages began. First, short and frantic, Caroline demanding to know what I'd done, how I could ruin everything. Then came Michael's confused, guilty apologies, caught somewhere between his wife's anger and his mother's silence. I imagined him pacing, trying to calm Caroline while avoiding saying what he truly felt. I knew that version of him too well, the man who wanted peace but never stood up for it. And then there was Emma. Her message was the hardest to see. I could tell from the tone that she didn't understand, that she was caught in the middle of something she hadn't created. For a moment, my heart ached for her. The girl who once baked cookies in my kitchen and danced barefoot in my living room. But even through the ache, I knew this was something she needed to see. Sometimes love means letting the truth hurt. The calls eventually slowed, but the rain kept falling, soft and steady against the roof. I stood at the sink, watching drops gather on the window pane, and felt the strangest mix of sadness and peace. For years, I had mistaken giving for connection and silence for harmony. But sitting there, with the phone still and the rain whispering outside, I understood love without respect is just dependency dressed in kindness. I wasn't angry anymore. If anything, I felt light, like a weight I'd carried for too long had finally been set down. I thought of all the times I'd been told to be grateful, to be quiet, to be the bigger person, and I realized I finally was, not by staying silent, but by standing firm. As the morning wore on, I poured another cup of coffee and sat by the window. The rain had deepened into a steady rhythm, and the world outside shimmered silver and new. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel forgotten. I simply felt free, somewhere deep inside. I knew this wasn't the end. There would be apologies, maybe even tears. But whatever came next, I was ready, because this time, I wasn't waiting to be invited back in. It was 2 days after the storm had passed when I finally heard from her. The phone buzzed quietly on the counter. This time, not with anger or accusation, but with a single name that made my heart pause. Emma. I hesitated before picking it up. Part of me was still tender, still raw from everything that had happened. But something deeper, a quiet knowing, told me to answer. Her voice was small, trembling with the kind of guilt that only comes when innocence meets consequence. She didn't have to say much. I could hear it all. The confusion, the regret, the love that had gotten tangled in the noise of adults who should have known better. Listening to her, I saw flashes of myself at that age, wanting to please everyone, not understanding how easily love could be weaponized. For a moment, I felt the ache of what had been lost between us, but it was followed by something gentler, compassion. She told me she missed me, that she didn't understand why things had gone so wrong. And as she spoke, I realized this was my choice point, not just as a grandmother, but as a woman who had spent a lifetime learning what forgiveness really means. The truth is, forgiveness isn't about forgetting what was done. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of it. So, I took a slow breath and let go. Not because what they did was right, but because holding on would only keep me anchored in pain. Later that afternoon, Emma came by. She looked so young standing at the door, eyes red from crying, her shoulders drawn in. I didn't need her to explain. I just opened the door, and in that quiet moment, I saw everything I needed to see. The apology, the love, the desire to make things right. We spent the afternoon in the kitchen, the same way we used to. I pulled out the mixing bowl and the old cookie recipe she'd loved as a little girl. The smell of vanilla filled the air, soft and familiar, like time folding back on itself. She sat at the counter, watching, her hands fidgeting, until finally she smiled. It was small at first, but it was real. As the first batch came out of the oven, I realized how healing can come in the simplest ways, in flour and sugar, in quiet understanding, in choosing love even after being hurt. We didn't need grand apologies or explanations. Sometimes, all it takes is showing up again, with honesty, with humility, with heart. When she left that evening, I watched her walk down the driveway, the sky still pale from sunset. My heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. I knew things wouldn't be perfect overnight, but for the first time, I believed they could be better. And as I washed the last dish, I thought about what I wanted her to remember. Not the money, or the party, or even the mistake. I wanted her to remember that respect, once broken, can be rebuilt, but only with love and truth. It's been a few months now since that day. The day everything changed. The house feels different somehow. Quieter, but not empty. There's a peace here that I didn't realize I'd been craving for years. Mornings have become my favorite time. I brew my coffee, open the windows, and let the light spill in across the kitchen floor. The same space that once carried the weight of heartbreak now feels like a sanctuary. My life has found a new rhythm. I still talk to Michael, but not every day, and that's all right. Our conversations are shorter, gentler, touched with a respect that was missing before. Caroline keeps her distance, and I no longer chase her approval. There are no more checks written, no more quiet resentments folded into envelopes. I give only what I choose to, and that choice feels like freedom. Most days, I pour my energy into things that feed my spirit instead of draining it. I volunteer twice a week at my church, helping young mothers who remind me of myself all those years ago, eager to please, afraid to disappoint. I tell them the same truth I had to learn the hard way: you can love people deeply and still say no. Boundaries don't mean you stop caring. They mean you finally start caring for yourself. 2. Emma visits often. We bake together, or sometimes we just sit in the garden talking about school, life, and the small things that make her laugh. She's growing into someone thoughtful and kind. Every time she looks at me now, I can see that she understands, not just what happened, but why it mattered. She's learning that love, real love, asks for honesty and respect, not sacrifice without return. The funny thing about peace is that it doesn't announce itself. It just slips in quietly, like sunlight through the blinds. I no longer feel the need to fix everything or everyone. I don't count what I've lost anymore. I notice what I've gained: clarity, dignity, and the strength to stand on my own. A few nights ago, I sat by the window with a pen and a small note card. I wrote Emma a short letter, something for her to find one day when she's older. It said, "My darling girl, life will ask you to give again and again. But remember, your heart is not a well that others are entitled to draw from. Give with love, but never at the cost of yourself. That's the legacy I hope to leave you." I placed the note in a small box with the gold bracelet I once meant to give her for that sweet 16. It feels right to save it for when she's ready, Not for a celebration, but for understanding. Now, I spend my evenings tending the small garden out back. The roses are finally blooming again. Soft pink and full of life. I often think about how growth can come after pruning. How sometimes the hardest cuts are the ones that let the light in. So, if you're listening to this and you've ever given too much of yourself just to feel loved, I want you to hear me clearly. Your worth isn't measured by what you give away. It's found in how gently you hold yourself through the storms. And maybe, just maybe, it's never too late to start protecting your own legacy.